Welcome to part 2 of the paper relief sculpture video series. Today I'm going to show you how to make a paper relief sculpture using bilateral symmetry. We're going to focus on the elements of art form, shape, and value, and the design principles of pattern and balance. For my first paper relief sculpture, I have a few materials that I've gotten together. I have a 5" by 5" piece of poster board that's going to be my base. I have a sketchbook and a pen or a pencil so that you can plan out your ideas. You will also need plain white paper. You could use computer paper or sketchbook paper or drawing paper. I have white glue and a pair of scissors. My first paper relief sculpture is going to be focusing on balance and specifically bilateral symmetry. The word bi means two, and the part of bilateral that says lateral means line. So when we're dealing with bilateral symmetry, we are dealing with two sides of a line of symmetry. So if my composition is a square, my line of symmetry could go straight down the center, and that means that the parts on the left side and the right side will be equal. I could also have my line of symmetry go horizontally across the page, and the parts on the top of my composition would be the same as the parts on the bottom of my composition. Your line of symmetry could also be at a diagonal, and the parts on one side of the diagonal line would be equal and the same as the other side of the diagonal line. So your line of symmetry can be anywhere in your composition, but the parts on either side of the composition need to be equal. Keeping symmetry, bilateral symmetry in mind, the next thing I'm going to do is start to make my paper forms that are going to be glued onto the base for my paper relief sculpture. So I'm just going to use some plain white computer paper. Sometimes thinner paper like computer paper can work better when you're folding than a thicker paper. And I'm just going to start out by experimenting with making a few different types of forms. My suggestion, when you have a flat piece of paper, we've got a shape, and in order to turn this into a form, we need to make it three-dimensional. So you can fold it, you can roll it, you can twist it. There are lots of different ways that you could make your shape turn into a form. You can cut it and glue it. So you can watch other videos on YouTube that deal with origami, which is the art of paper folding, or you can just play around and experiment with different ways to make your paper three-dimensional. So take a few minutes now to experiment, make as many different paper forms as you can. I've started out with a few forms that are geometric. A geometric form is going to have geometric shapes in the different planes and angles. Think about cubes and pyramids and cones. And then along the bottom here, I have a couple sample forms that are organic forms. Those are going to be more free-flowing in nature and not defined by geometry. So I'm going to choose one or two or maybe three of these to use in my composition, and I'm going to need to make a lot more. So to start out, I'm just going to choose this pyramid form for my bilateral symmetry paper relief. And so I'm just going to make a bunch of those so that I can arrange them in a bilateral symmetry composition. I have now finished with constructing all of my forms. I laid them out on the base of the poster board while I was working, just so I made sure that I had enough made that would cover the base. One of the things that artists are good at is thinking outside of the box. So if your forms come outside of that base, that is better than having parts of the base show. The base is not part of the artwork. The base is just to hold the forms in place. So we really want to make sure that we're covering all of that. Another thing to think about if you're working at home is to make sure that your hands are clean when you're working with white paper. You don't want to have Cheeto fingers. So just make sure that your workspace is clean and that your hands are clean while you're working. And you can also see that I have not used any tape in making these. It would be faster to adhere the tape with tape, but you would see all of those little tabs of tape in your finished sculpture. And I just don't want to have that. It's going to look better if I don't have visible tape. So the next thing I'm going to do is start to glue these down onto the base. I have moved them off to the side and I have sketched a very light line of symmetry across the center of my base so that when I start to glue these on, that I can use that line of symmetry to help me out. So I'm just going to, and you're going to need a lot of glue when you're gluing these forms down to the base, and it's going to take a little bit of time to dry. So I'm putting my first form down, and I'm going to then work on the other side of that form, on the other side of the line of symmetry, so that that matches up. And then I'm going to start to work off of that. I'm just going to have one of these triangular forms angled up, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side of the line of symmetry until the whole composition is covered. I have now finished my bilateral symmetry paper relief sculpture.